In this presentation, I will be discussing the great American company, General Motors. I'm going to be talking about a little bit of their history, the prosperity that they experienced, and exactly what factors led to their demise in the last 10, 15 years or so. And I'm going to discuss some of their problems and how some of their woes could have been avoided. The history of this great company started in 1908 when it was founded by an ambitious salesman by the name of William Durant. At the time of its inception, it had Buick as its sole holding. However, in the next 18 months, it snapped up 30 other car makers. Some of these were to include Oldsmobile, Pontiac, and Cadillac. The problem with this is that they grow so big so fast that the company became saddled with debt that it couldn't repay. And it bought the company on the brink of bankruptcy. Because of this, Durant was ousted by the bankers in the early 1920s, and he was replaced by a man by the name of Alfred Sloan. Under the new management and direction of Alfred Sloan, he reorganized the company and really catapulted it into the automotive stratosphere, particularly after the Second World War. His vision was to supply a car for every purse and purpose. His efforts allowed the company to flourish during the 50s and 60s. In 1950, GM was producing 40% of the world's cars, which is very, very, very high. And by 1960, their market share was over 50%. With the lack of foreign competition, sales and earnings were high, and this allowed the workers of GM to experience very high pension packages and free healthcare coverage for life. And that is something that is unheard of in our time, and it would eventually be the detriment of the company having to pay for these pension packages. So where did it all go wrong? How did a company that was flourishing so well, an iconic symbol of American wealth and capitalism, fall to its knees? Let's look at some of the contributing factors. The 1970s proved to be a very crucial decade for General Motors, and it brought to light many of their inbred problems. Some of these problems included labor issues. In 1970, there was a labor strike that took 400,000 workers off the job for 67 days, and this further tanked the U.S. economy. There was also an oil crisis in the late 70s that caused soaring gas prices. And these soaring gas prices only fed the demand for smaller, more fuel-efficient cars that GM did not produce at the time. Americans typically were used to gas-guzzling V8s. Then there was the introduction of CAFE standards, and these standards were implemented to help the domestic car makers really compete with the Japanese imports that were coming in at the time. Again, this was something that GM wasn't ready for, nor did they plan for this change. The U.S. economy at this time was undergoing socio-economic change, and General Motors did little, if anything at all, to exercise their survival skills and adapt. GM was very slow to respond to this change. Instead, they continued doing what they did best, which was producing oversized, gas-guzzling American V8s. And to the average consumer, a V8 was not a very good financial move at this time. This only caused the Japanese cars to become even more appealing because they provided exactly what the people needed. The people needed smaller cars, which were more fuel efficient and reliable. So as a result, and as to no surprise to me, GM's market share continued to slide. It dropped to 44% at the beginning of the 80s. By the time General Motors saw the light, it was already too little, too late. Japanese car manufacturers already had a sure foot on American soil with their smaller, more fuel-efficient, and more appealing cars. This put GMs back on their heels, and they rushed to design and produce smaller cars. This rush came at the expense of quality. GM's cars in the mid-80s to the late 90s were absolutely horrible. Their small cars did not appeal to the consumer, nor were they reliable. As a child, the best GM small car I could remember was a 95 Geo Prism, which essentially was a rebadged Toyota Corolla. It even had a Toyota engine. So, as the appeal of their product sank, so did their sale prices. GM was losing $2,000 on every car they built by late 1989. So this caused a further decline of market share, and more importantly, it created a loss of consumer confidence. The company that once stood as an American icon lost its customer base, and it really was the beginning of the end of the old GM. GM also suffered from what I like to call contributing factors, and these assisted to the demise of the company. First, there was brand clashing. GM had a lot of subdivisions that operated as separate companies. They didn't talk or communicate to each other, and what this created was brand cannibalization. Oftentimes, what you had was one car brand looking exactly like the other. Then it became hard for a consumer to justify spending premium dollar on a Cadillac Escalade when really underneath it was just like a Chevrolet Tahoe, which was much cheaper. The early 2000s Pontiac Firebird and Chevrolet Camaro also presented the same issue. But this didn't bode very well with consumers. Also, they also had crippling pension and healthcare costs that continued to rise. Instead of trying to negotiate with the UAW for a more competitive contract, GM decided to take a hit, and they took a hit on every car they sold. Every car they sold added an extra $1,400 because of these high healthcare costs. This put them at a serious disadvantage to the competition. Then they were also riding the big SUV wave. People wanted SUVs, and they were producing these in large numbers. What assisted this is that they found a loophole in the CAFE standards that categorized SUVs as trucks. So the laws mandating their fuel mileage were a lot less lax. Therefore, GM was able to continue to produce SUVs getting poor gas mileage. This eventually hurt them when the consumer base really moved away from SUV production, leaving them with really a large amount of inventory that they couldn't sell. This increased debt. There was also a lot of poor management throughout the years. GM management really made some very poor acquisitions. Some of these included Saturn, Hummer, and what I think to be the worst of all was Daewoo. Even the name alone would push consumers away. So these were some of the contributing factors that really led them on the brink of bankruptcy. GM did try to stop the bleeding though. In the early 2000s, they went on a vehicle incentive rampage. They were offering 0% financing for loans up to 5 years. When that wore off, they offered a $3,000 rebate on new car sales. At its highest, they were offering $8,000 rebates on new car sales. In order to afford these rebates, GM had to increase their sticker prices. These higher sticker prices sometimes were higher than the foreign competition. This did not sit well with consumers, and it only made the foreign competition look more attractive. In addition to that, the high rebates tanked the resale and residual values of GM cars. This only further pushed customers away. GM also finally dropped its unproductive brands, some of which included Hummer, Oldsmobile, and Saturn. In 2008, when gas spiked to $4 a gallon, GM was really in trouble. Truck sales plummeted. They were left with unsold inventory, and they couldn't continue to sustain this damage. This eventually pushed them into filing for bankruptcy. They filed for bankruptcy. They had multiple closings of dealerships and of factories, and they had to accept Obama-backed government bailout. Sometimes I wonder what could have been done to have averted exactly what happened to General Motors. And these are just some of my suggestions. I think they should have invested in a small car segment sooner. The writing was on the wall in the 1970s, and for a company that's been producing cars since the turn of the last century, they should have paid attention and saw this coming and make changes as necessary. They should have also dropped unproductive brands that weren't producing any income. They held on to these brands way too long. They should have cut the fat, cut the losses, and move on. Then they should have negotiated more competitive and wage pension packages, ones that would not cripple them and have so much overhead cost and would allow them to be more competitive, particularly against the foreign competition. They should have also concentrated on the socio-economic climate, what the customers wanted, what they were willing to pay for. Toyota did this when they launched the Scion line, a completely new line geared towards young buyers, and it was totally successful. It totally took off. GM could have done this first, and they would have had the market. In addition, they would have been able to increase product quality and really satisfy customers. And this is what brings recurring customers. When customers are satisfied, they come back to your brand, they keep your brand, and they buy your brand. These are just some of the things I believe that GM could have implemented along the way that would have prevented what happened to them. After the bailout, GM emerged as a new company, and I think they have a bright future ahead. They're now a smaller, leaner company with less subsidiaries, and this makes it able for them to be more focused on producing quality products and products that appeal really, especially visually, to the consumer. I think their lineup right now that they have is very attractive. I think the Volt is an awesome car and a car of the future and something that they can expand upon. They also have a couple other great models like the Cruise. The Cruise is a very good car. It's received very well in China, and I really expect GM to spearhead into the future. One former president of GM, Charles Wilson, said, "What's good for GM is good for America," and I totally believe that this is true. When GM fell, the American economy pretty much tanked right along with it, and I think if GM succeeds, that the American economy will bounce back. So I, for one, look forward to the future and hope that GM succeeds.